Welcome, Blain. Thanks for agreeing to talk about grazing principles. Blain Hjertaas has farmed his entire life near Redvers, Saskatchewan. Spent the first number of years of his career grain farming and then converted to a grass farm. And he's here today to talk about grazing principles. He's also a certified holistic educator, so he spends quite a bit of his time educating producers. And he's also involved in a project with Understanding Ag and General Mills, working with producers to implement regenerative principles. So with that, Blain, I'll let you get started.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Michael, and it's good to be here. So my purpose in this little webinar is just to talk about grazing principles. We sometimes use the wrong words, and I think it's really important when we talk about changing the way we graze that we understand the principles and the words that we use. So the first picture here is just me moving a few cows ahead, and we use funny words like paddocks and graze periods and recovery times and stock densities and rates. Animal impact over grazing and severe grazing is some of the terms. And so I just want to spend a few minutes going through these words so to help you understand what they mean and why we use these words is what I hope to achieve by this particular thing this morning. So what we're doing then, when we look at it in the bigger context, is what we want to accomplish by grazing is maximize the amount of solar collection that we do, how much photosynthesis we capture. We want to make our water cycle more effective. If we have a 4-inch rain and 3.5 of them run off, we only had a ½ an inch of rain in effect. We want to make sure we have at least 4 inches of rain, maybe even more. We want to capture some fog, we want to capture some dew, all those things that we can do. Even though the rain gauge didn't measure anything, we could still have water cycling in our systems. Same thing with the mineral cycle. So we want to ensure that those minerals are going around and around in a cycle, and we do that by increasing the diversity of the plants that we grow and by encouraging the underground livestock that we don't often think about. Plus all the birds, insects, everything that we can do to encourage more diversity above and below ground. So that all makes our mineral cycle better. And the last thing then, as I've said the word a number of times, is diversity. It's critical. So we think we're really diverse when we got cows and alfalfa and brome. Well, that's really 3 species. Let's start talking about 10 or 12 or 15 species, or think back 200 years ago when there was probably 150 species of plants on every single acre, and thousands of different types of birds, insects, etc., living in that very diverse ecosystem, plus all of the life underground. If you read some of the journals of Lewis and Clark back in 1803 and 1804, I believe it was, when they were walking along the banks of the Missouri River, which isn't very far from where I farm, they talk about every single step there was something scurrying out of their way or a different insect that they'd never seen before. They were just constantly amazed by the incredible diversity. And so when our great-grandfathers came along and started to farm, they took that incredible diversity and simplified it to what we value today, what we call monoculture agriculture. So there was huge consequences to what happened to our ecosystem and the devastation that we've caused to our soils and in life in general on the Great Plains. In fact, people say it's one of the most disturbed ecosystems in the world. And so what we're doing by practicing adaptive multi-paddock grazing is attempting to reverse some of this by maximizing these 4 things I just talked about. So the first thing then, that when we talk about grazing, is what we call the graze period, and that's how many days the animals are actually on that piece of land. So under a perfect world, it would be no more than 5 days maximum. Now, I want to illustrate why we would say that. So here we have the grazing event. We got a cow chewing away on a little bit of grass there. But this is what we don't often see. So after that grazing event, so this was grazed on August the 1st, and this picture was taken on the 5th of August. And if you notice, a lot of the tips of the leaves are browning. See, brown tips here and here and here and here all over the place. So what's actually happening then is underneath, here's the picture I showed you, but what's actually happening is there's a tremendous amount of energy stored in this root reserve down here. And all of that energy is actually shunting, moving up into this area right here of the plant, which is called the crown. And the reason the plant is doing that is because this plant has just suffered a major shock. All of a sudden, all of these solar panels up here are now gone. So the plant has to replace those solar panels, and you don't get anything in nature for free. The energy to do that has to come from somewhere. So what's happening then is the energy from here is starting to regrow these new leaves. But at this point, this might be 6, 7, 8 days after the grazing event, this plant is still not self-sufficient. It's not making enough, it doesn't have enough solar panels yet to replace its root reserves. So we get out 10, 15, 20 days, depending on the time of year, how the moisture conditions are. Now, this plant is big enough that it's actually starting to rebuild root mass and carbohydrate storage down in here. So it's self-sufficient, and so now it's beginning the process of rebuilding the reserves that were here when we grazed it the first time. And so now, this picture over here, now we're out maybe 50 days, maybe 100 days, it might even be a year, depending on the situation, where we are in the world. Now this plant is basically back to where it was here when we grazed it, and it's now ready to go into winter, set seed, whatever. Now we could graze this plant again without having any negative effects. If we graze it here or here, that is called overgrazing. And it's really important to understand that concept. It took me a long time to get that one through my head when I first started into this. But once you get that through your head, it actually helps you understand how you do your planning. And so if you watch cows on a continuous graze system, they will chop this off after about a week or 10 days. Those cows will come back to the same patch that they grazed 10 days ago, and they will eat this off again. So what happens then is this plant has to go back to this system right here. It starts over, but now it doesn't have as much root reserves as it did up here. So it does it again. It wants to survive, so it sends up more leaves again, starts the process over. Cows come along again 10, 15, 20 days later, chop it off again. The plant does it again. But it does that 3 or 4 times, and the plant gives up and dies. And if you think about walking on a continuous graze pasture, basically what you find on those continuous graze pastures in the part of the world that I live in is basically 100% Kentucky bluegrass. And it's the only species that can survive that repeated continuous overgrazing. And Kentucky bluegrass is not a particularly wonderful plant to have. So if we want to change that, we need to change our management. And that's why this graze period of letting those animals be on this land for 5 days maximum stopped the overgrazing. And that's the important part.
So the consequences of overgrazing are a weakened root structure,
Yep.
loss of diversity,
Right.
loss of resilience in that system
Right.
to handle dry or wet or too hot, too cold.
Yes, exactly. So we want to do everything in our power to prevent that overgrazing. So what we do then is we move to this next concept here is we use stalk density. So there's 2 terms here. There's stalking rate and stalking density. So we have 2 80-acre fields here. On the left-hand side, we have traditional grazing. So we have 10 cows on those 80 acres for the season. So if we take 10 cows at 1,400 pounds, it's 14,000 pounds. Divide that by 80 acres, we have 175 pounds of animal per acre on the 80 acres on the left-hand side and on the 80 acres on the right-hand side. There is no difference in the stalking rate. But the difference now is the fellow on the right-hand side split his 80 acres into 8 paddocks of 10 acres each. So a paddock is a smaller division. And then what he did is he put all of his 10 cows on that 10 acres. So now his stock density is 1,400 pounds in this very simple example versus the other side of a stocking rate of 175 pounds.
Mhm.
And so the reason we do that then is that that's how we protect our graze period. So they're in that paddock for 5 days, then I move them into the next paddock for 5 days. And that is how you prevent the overgrazing. If the cows can just freely roam around in here as they wish, then the grass will continually be overgrazed and will slowly over time go backwards. So that's the key concept here. So this is just some few pictures of using higher stock density to achieve different goals. And you can see here, this is an early spring picture. So the fence was right here yesterday. The cattle went into here, and you can see there's actually a fence right there. So they have a long, narrow strip. This is probably about 10th of April picture. And what you don't really see here, you can kind of see green tinges here, but there was quite a bit of new green growth in the bottom here. And so this stockpile grass, meaning grass that we didn't graze the fall before, the cows have to eat a lot of that to get that new green growth. They really want the new green growth, but they have to eat a lot of the old dead growth in order to get the new green growth. Plus, in the process of doing that, what they don't eat, they turn it all up and trample it down and get the land covered in litter. And you could not achieve that if you had continuous grazing. You have to have a lot of animals in a small area, and that's called higher stock density. And so you can measure that in thousands of pounds of animals per acre. And so when you hear guys talking about density, they'll say, well, I was at 500,000 pounds, or I was at 200,000 pounds. And what they mean then is they had 200,000 pounds of animals per acre for that day, maybe that hour. It varies all the time in a planned system like this.
Right.
So another thing that you can do then as density is, in the part of the world I live in, brush encroaches. So if we didn't do anything, just continuous grazed it, eventually these trees here on this side would keep on suckering out, as you can see here, and they'd keep moving. But by using the higher stock density, we make those cattle go into the brush here. They clean up all the grass under the trees under here. And in the process of doing that, we set these, in this case, this is choke cherry. It's actually setting it back quite a bit. It didn't kill them all, but it certainly slowed down the encroachment. And if I do this 3 or 4 times in a row, I can actually make that brush go the other way. Now, in my system, I don't want to get rid of all the brush, so there's kind of a happy medium, which I don't know if I've quite figured out where it is yet, but that's kind of the system. So high stock density can do a lot of things. So what it does then, a couple examples here, is it gives you a more even graze. So instead of having one patch of grass overgrazed like we do in a continuous system, we have fairly even. Whether it's high or low, that's up to you. We have a more even distribution of the manure across the land. So in a perfect system of grazing, we would want the cow to eat 1 square meter of grass off, step ahead 1 meter, and dump her poop back out on that spot where she just ate. That would be the perfect system. Now, I can very quickly design a system where she can go and eat and have all of the manure dumped beside the water. That's what we don't want. So we need to think about how we design our systems to make it work. So basically we get that manure spread as evenly as we possibly can back across the system. So animal impact refers to what the hooves are doing. When we talk about grazing, we always think about what they eat, and that's part of it. But what those hooves do is absolutely critical also. I showed you the picture of the early spring grazing and how those hooves were tramping that grass, breaking it down, getting rid of the shade so that the new grass, soon as that graze period is over, 1 day later, that new grass under there will be able to get lots of sunshine and capture it right away. If we wouldn't have broke that dead grass down, it would have been shaded. It would have been more difficult for those plants to capture sunshine and make photosynthesis. So we're putting that litter down. Usually, in general terms, our animal performance goes up, our land improves, and our plants will over time move tighter together, which is all good things. So recovery then is the amount of time from when we had our graze period of 2 days, 5 days, whatever it is, till we come back again. And that's a hard one to know what the right number is. And so this little example right here just gives you an indication of what's happening underneath the ground. So on the left-hand side, we have a plant that's fully expressed itself. It wasn't grazed for the season. The next plant to the right of that had one grazing, and you can see how the roots are. And then when we get to the far right is like your lawn, where it's being mowed twice a week through the growing season. And so you can see there's huge consequences in that. And every farmer, I think, in Western Canada will know that if you don't water your lawn, after about 2 or 3 weeks of July sunshine, your lawn will be very brown. And when you look at the root system under a lawn, you can see why. There's virtually no roots. And you can think of it as a mirror. If you have a very short amount of grass above, you will have a very short amount of grass below. Whereas if you have a very tall amount of grass above, you will have an awful lot of tall roots below. And it doesn't take much of a rocket scientist to figure out which one is going to be more drought resilient. And so what we want to achieve then is the left-hand side. And that's why we want that very short graze period of 5 days or less. And then we want to have a relatively long recovery period, 50, 80, 100 days. In some places in the world, it'll be up to a year to let that plant totally recover. So that's the concepts of grazing. So here's just a couple pictures showing the difference on my farm of recovery. So this picture was taken on the 16th of July and is showing you 30 days of recovery there. And you can see there's the odd plant here starting to head out, which would be an indication that it's recovered in 30 days. But most of the plants are not. You can see here the alfalfa is still quite vegetative, you know. So here's the next picture then. This is 60 days of recovery now, picture taken the same day. So where the truck is sitting was grazed on May, roughly the middle of May. And you can see the difference. There's a fence running right down here. So this is 60 days, and on this side, it hasn't been grazed yet. And so this is getting close to recovered this particular year. You can see the sweet clover here is got heads on it, it's flowering. You can see back in here, there's brome grass, it's now recovered. But overall, I wouldn't say it's quite recovered yet. And why would I graze this when I still have this to graze? But so that's the concept of recovery. We want to let those plants grow back so they get really deep, resilient roots capture lots of photosynthesis, so and then graze them down in a very short period and move off.
And those deep roots are going down to get moisture and nutrients that otherwise a shallow root wouldn't have access to. That's how you increase production.
So just to illustrate the difference, this picture is taken the same day as the past two on an adjacent quarter that is managed different. This is a neighbor's quarter. And so this is continuous graze. So his cattle were on that piece, just grazing wherever they wanted. And you can see the tremendous difference in the amount of biomass on this system versus what you just saw on the two pictures previous.
Right. Who's that skinny guy?
Yeah, I don't know who that guy is. Just look at the boots, eh?
Yeah,
So I just go back one, you know, just take a look at the difference in biomass there. You know, it's same day within half a mile. So the rainfall, the climatic conditions, everything are exactly the same.
Right. Just management is different.
Management's different. That's the only thing. Yeah. So the key then, you know, how you graze is totally up to you. But one of the things that I think we sometimes get mixed up in our modern approaches to agriculture is we forget the difference or don't understand the difference between production and profit. So I often hear my neighbors, other cattlemen talking about how many dollars they got per calf. You know, they topped the auction last fall or whatever. They had a 900-pound calf and they got $2, so they got $1,800. Wow. Or they talk about, you know, the dollars per calf. But I would encourage you when you're sitting down doing some farm analysis is that you calculate what your profit per calf is, and even better yet, figure out what is your profit per acre. Those are the numbers that really and truly tell the story. And by grazing the way I just described, where we're using more intense grazing, letting the grass express itself more, you will find that your stocking, the number of animals, the stocking rate that you can run on a farm will go up considerably. Many producers are saying 2, 3, I've heard even some people say up to 4 times more than they did before after a few years of starting to rebuild land. You start doing a number like this on your profit per acre, and it becomes quite a bit higher than it was previously on a continuous graze system. So
Right.
it's something that you need to really be aware of and think about, because the reason that we do this is to be profitable.
I have a question. That's so this idea or focus on average daily gain kind of becomes irrelevant when you're starting to think about, say, average daily gain versus number of pounds of beef produced per acre. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're chasing 3 pounds of gain per day, whatever. But it takes,
it costs you to do that. That's the question.
10 acres of versus if you can produce. So yeah, you got to start to think about pounds of beef per acre versus average daily gain.
Right. Yeah. You gotta think it through and make sure that this is the number that matters, and you want it quite positive. That's the key.
Yeah.
So
profit instead of production.
Yes. And so when we look at, if we're talking cow-calf operations anywhere from the Red River Valley to the Rocky Mountains, the single biggest cost on every single operation in Western Canada is winter feed. And so anything that we can do to shorten that cost adds to the profit picture. And so in real simple terms, it's grow more and graze longer. That's the key. And so by doing our planning, having those short graze periods of less than 5 days, letting that grass have a good long recovery period, then we can be, this picture is taken December the 19th, and you can see, how tall that grass is. It's still relatively green yet. There's snow on it, and we've probably had minus 20-degree days already by this time, but still those cows are out there doing very well on grass, whereas all my neighbors have probably already been feeding hay bales now for at least a month, maybe some of them 6 weeks, at a lot more dollars per day than this right here costs. And so the key of the reason this system works so well is because you can plan this all out, and it does make profit. But it does take planning. And the other thing that a lot of people will say is you got to move cows. And yes, you do. You have to have a system that's set up. You need lots of paddocks, and you have to be prepared to move cows on a regular basis, whether it's every hour, whether it's every day or every 3 days. That's each individual's choice how you do that. But cows move really easy. They all have 4 legs, and they want to move. Once they get onto this system, you don't have to go chase cows. They move ahead all on their own. So it's pretty simple. So if I could share a couple of secrets, the first thing to success is get that land covered. You need to get your land, you got to trample down some litter on the surface. So when you have, situations like this where you see lots of bare land sticking up, these are the kind of situations you start to see. You see silver colored weeds show up, and cows do not like silver colored weeds. If I drive by at 100 clicks an hour, 110 clicks an hour down a highway, I can tell instantly the type of grazing management that happens just by the color of the pasture. When I see silver pastures, I know that it's going backwards really rapidly. And there's very little out there for a cow to eat. So you have to get that land covered. The second thing you have to do is understand what overgrazing is and prevent it. And so how you prevent it is you have more paddocks and you have to move cattle. And the third key then is movement. You have to have those animals moving. And I think that's the thing that we forgot about ever since the homesteading days. Farmers, the back quarter, or maybe it was a little bit rocky piece. It was too hard to break it up. So that became the quarter that the cows always stayed on. And so we put a barbed wire fence around there, and we forgot about grazing management. So the key in this newer system of grazing management is we've got to make sure the animals move. And if you think about how our prairies evolved, how any of the open areas of the world that we farm are, is they formed under huge herds of animals that were grazing. And those animals constantly moved. They were harried by predators, whether it was lions or cheetahs in Africa, or whether it was buffalo wolves here in Western Canada. Those bison didn't stay in one spot for the summer. They constantly moved across the prairie. And so that kept all of the grass grazed off. It prevented the overgrazing. And that's what created the very, very rich, fertile soils that our great grandfathers came here to find. So we can change the picture on the left-hand side to the picture on the right-hand side fairly quickly by just changing the way we manage. But the key is we have to change.
So it's not the cow.
It's the how.
It's the how. Yeah, I can't blame the cow. It's more.
It's not the cow. It's the how.
Yep.
And when cattle are managed like this, we're sequestering way more carbon than what the so-called critics tell us that the methane that they're farting out and burping out is doing. Yep. And one of the things that there's never been a scientific study done yet is that looks at what the role of the methanotropes is. On healthy soil, like on the right-hand side, there's bacteria, but actually directly consume methane. On a system like this, they're probably absent. So then the methane does go up into the environment. In a system like this, the methanotropes actually consume a good bit of the bacteria, or of the methane that goes up. And so we think about 100 million buffalo 150 years ago, there's roughly 100 million cattle today. If they were all managed like on the right-hand side, there would be absolutely no issues with greenhouse gases in cattle.
Right, and we'd also be rebuilding our degraded prairie soils using the cow as a tool to accomplish that.
Yes. Yeah, I've taken organic matter on my soil from 2 to 7.5% in 25 years.
Yeah, that's impressive.
That's it, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That's great. And we'll be posting this to the Manitoba Grazing Club YouTube channel that we're starting. Doing that, of course, because that's going to be one of our most effective ways to learn and communicate, and in this time of pandemic. So we appreciate this, Blain, and we'll hope to do a few more over the course of the winter. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So it's just my last slide here. It's like the key is movement, but grazing, there's a lot of science to it. All of the calculations, all that is science, but part of it also is art. And that's the skill, is that you need to know your own land. You need to have a sense of what is the weather doing this year? Is it going to be dry? Is it going to be wet? And, the science you can learn out of a book or at a school, but the art part of it comes with experience. And so I would encourage you to spend time with a good grazer, pick his brain, follow him around for a day if he'll have you, and learn what he's seeing, what he's thinking. And I guess one of the keys is observation. Yeah. What are the plants telling you? What are the animals telling you? Those are things that, I think you just learn from experience. It's part of the art of being a farmer.
And we've lost that skill to be observant, to feel and to hear and observe. So we're having to relearn some of that and then, apply that to our adaptive management of understanding cows and grass and soil and water. So yeah, thank you, Blain, and well,
thank you for the opportunity.
We'll be looking to do a few more. Talk to you later.